I didn't see that person fighting or going through the things I felt like I was going through, and I wasn't relating it to drinking. It was just, um, because I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't cognizant that this drinking in this environment was making me be miserable, making me be impatient, and create the kinds of patterns and things that I witnessed or was a part of growing up from my parents.
Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Sean. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. We kind of a bit, I live in Melbourne, so you never know what the weather's going to be. And it was beautiful and sunny yesterday, and today it's raining. And as we mentioned in the pre-show, I've got these kookaburras sitting on my back porch waiting to be fed, but they're going to have to wait until after our interview.
I think they'll be okay. Yeah, I
What's
know
happening?
what. Well, the difference in weather. I'm in Canada, and we had a frost warning this morning, and it was 20 degrees Celsius yesterday. So you go from shorts and t-shirt to wearing sweaters like I have on now.
It's a bit like that. For the audience, who we have here, this is Sean Robinson. Now, he's worked in construction and been a firefighter for 20 years, and he was surrounded by toxic masculinity, and he could never admit to trying journaling, listening to self-help books or podcasts. I mean, reading, are you kidding me? Then he did it. He read books, he journaled, and he loved it. And then he wrote his own book about his journey to not drinking alcohol. The book, Going Dry, My Path to Overcoming Habitual Drinking, which was a life changer for him. So welcome, Sean. Pleasure to have you on the show and talk about the experiences that you have. Do you want to start? Do you want to go back and talk about that experience? Because you say you were surrounded by toxic masculinity. What was that environment like?
Um, I think it was just that at first I didn't know that I had an issue because everyone around me, it was what was going on. It was like
Mm,
it had to be a certain way, or we were hanging out, spending time with friends or family, and
mm,
especially around drinking, it was such a social tool that I didn't think anything different. So feeling pretty miserable, physically, mentally. I just needed some sort of change, and I would have argued at the time I tried everything when it probably was only like one or two things and didn't really stick with it and felt bad about it, which I think is pretty common. But
yeah.
leading up to the point I decided I needed to try some changes, it was just that I wasn't sure what to do and felt like I had to maintain that lane I was in of the people around me and what I was used to doing.
So it became, from your experience, it was, as you said, you weren't feeling great. You're feeling miserable. And you're around by people that were doing the same thing that you were doing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, so I got up to 320 pounds and was just very negative. I didn't have any patience as far as like my irritability with my family, my wife, my kids, and I was starting to notice some patterns that I would kind of pick up on later in this journey that mirrored what I went through when I was younger with with my parents and their
Mm,
social life and friends and drinking, and how they would get with just early mornings, and with being busy, and the patterns that I didn't appreciate that I was translating to my kids with some yelling and impatience and irritability and
mm.
swearing, and nothing physically, but there was definitely some emotional um, damage. I don't want to say damage, but perhaps there would have been with the way that I was treating my kids, my family, uh,
Mm.
with how I was growing up.
So from that perspective, is that what you're saying there is there was behaviors from your parents that you were mirroring because that's what you grew up with?
Yeah, I think with that, like, toxic masculinity, and speaking from what was expected of me, I felt like some of that came from how I saw my parents bringing up me, and I have two younger brothers. So what I thought was true about how I was supposed to behave when I got to being a parent,
Mm.
I was doing that. It was like, that was the example I had, so that was all I had to go by. The people around me, my friends, and the way they were brought up, I didn't live in that environment, so I couldn't speak from that other experience. I only had what I thought to be true.
Yeah, so it's interesting what you're mentioning there about what you thought to be true, your beliefs. Is you grew up in this environment and had certain sets of behaviors, and from that you associated with people that behaved in a similar way. If I'm hearing correctly, and that became your world. That's all you saw. Is that right?
Yeah, I so when I was younger, I was a kid. Like, my parents were married. They were 20 when they were married, and I was 20. They were 22, so they had young friends, and that was normal for my parents' generation.
Mm,
But they had a young social life, and while we were safe, my brothers and I never really they weren't allowed to drink when we were kids, but it was fun in games to mix drinks or to bring drinks from the fridge, and there was a lot of environment around drinking that seemed like the way I was supposed to carry myself when I got older. It was like
mm,
when you had friends over, you were supposed to have lots of drinks available. When you went camping, we did a lot of camping growing up, and you had to make sure you had all this stuff because you're going to be at a campsite somewhere and not able to go and get more. So I carried a lot of these things that I learned when I was younger, especially around drinking, to the way that I was supposed to be when I got older, like an example that was
mm.
teaching me everything I needed to know about it.
And was it a case with the people that you were surrounding yourself with? Because I noticed some friends and I would catch up for a poker night regularly and have done for eons, long as I can remember. And it's a boys' thing. We get together and have do that. And it was only really recently, because I stopped drinking a long time ago, because it just I was with someone who well, I thought they had a drinking problem. I thought if I stopped drinking, they might stop drinking, um, and and that didn't work. But we didn't stay together. But I found I was happy with it, so I decided not to drink. And then when we would go to the you're on the train station.
Yeah.
And we've got
Exit
we
message now. Press pound or hang up. To leave a callback number, press 1.
Sorry,
To
my
relay your
that's
message,
all right.
press 3. For additional options, press 9.
my kids have engaged the Google speaker from across the room.
That's
To send this
okay.
message now, press pound or hang up. To leave a callback number, press 1. To
That's
replay your message,
Sorry, just
press
one
3.
sec.
For additional
that's all right.
options, press 9.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. The joys of technology. We have everything connected, and then everyone can hear what everyone else is doing. I love that.
Oh, yes.
We just had for the listeners. We just had the children logging into the speaker and that coming through on the podcast. So as you would have heard, which is cool. I mean, this is life. This is what we deal with. That's part of everyday life, and part of what I like to do on this show is to show that too, that it is okay to have these things happen. I think we've got too plastic now, where we're editing and presenting this persona on social media that everything is perfect, and we've even cut out ums and ahs of how we speak. I mean, it's how we speak. It's all good. Um,
Hmm.
I was talking about that because with the perspective of what you were seeing, and the people you were associating with, but was it a case of because of what you were seeing as opposed to the broader spectrum that was there? As I mentioned, I'd stopped drinking a long time ago, and I'd go to the poker nights with my friends, and people would drink, and I didn't, and I just didn't. I mean, no one. said anything or anything like that, and I just went about what I was doing. But it was almost years later that I noticed there was a bunch of people there that weren't drinking either. I didn't even pay attention to it. I just thought everyone else was drinking. I was the odd one out. But I, didn't, no one seemed to bother about it. And was it that? Do you think that was the case from your perspective as well? Were there other people around you just didn't notice it, that were doing something differently?
Yeah, I think so because I mean, with the especially being on the volunteer fire department, like there was well, we didn't. I never mixed the two, so let's make sure that's clear. But
Yeah.
there was functions because we spent a lot of time together, and there was people that were on the department that didn't drink. Right? It
Mm,
was not that everybody went to the social functions and had their drinks, but some of us that were and spent together, with 20 years. I'm 20 years in August coming up, but you're with the same people all the time, go to the same parties, and we have the Christmas things together, and our kids grow up together.
mm,
And there was definitely people around me that weren't drinking, but that wasn't something that I thought was me. I didn't,
mm,
it was fine that they weren't doing it, but I didn't even acknowledge it subconsciously because I wasn't going to be that person because
mm,
I was brought up with this example. And, I created my own habits growing up. It was just that
mm.
it was socially acceptable, and we had a game of counting the beer cans before they got returned to the store, and the
Yeah.
kids got this fun game of crushing all the cans and putting them in the bag. And then my I think my grandmother was the most excited when I turned legal age so I could help bring her cases of beer. Like it was it was funny. Like it was around me everywhere, and I didn't know that it was, it could be as toxic as it is.
Mm,
And the people around me not drinking, I never thought I was that person, so it didn't occur to me that that was who I could be. Like, it was just that wasn't even something that crossed my mind, that I just wasn't going to have drinks with my friends or drinks at a function.
mm. 'Cause, yeah, I was wondering about that from that perspective. Because similar from my background, my background's, Polish, Ukraine, and Russian. So you can imagine there's a lot of vodka in there when I was growing up. And, my granddad used to get a bottle of vodka, and he'd take the neck out of it and put red cordial in it and then just drink that, and it was like that was one of the things other than drinking it straight. Um, Although he was, from what I understand, from what my dad tells me, he was quite clever as well, because when they would be playing drinking games and things like that, he would actually switch the vodka out for water, and so everyone else would get really smashed, and he'd be the one still sober. Um, so it's pretty clever, but it was that drinking environment, and I remember when I was younger, I won a bottle of champagne at a raffle. Go back to those days when you couldn't do that as a kid. I was 7 years old, and
Oh,
my parents let me drink it, which I didn't drink the whole lot, but I drank enough that I had a massive hangover the next day. I still remember it was painful. Um, but it was that culture of that was just a normal thing to do, and it sounds like you had a similar sort of experience. Is that fair to say?
oh yeah, definitely. It wasn't at a line. Like, I never saw my parents throwing up or
Mm,
smashed beyond belief. It was social. They played cards and had their friends, and there was music, and their friends had kids. So I grew up with kids, and we were playing outside. And it wasn't that it was, this toxic environment. It was just I grew up with this party favor, this alcohol being such a staple in anything we did. We couldn't go out for Halloween door to door without the neighborhood having, treats for the parents and filling up their cups. And it was literally like everywhere around me.
mm,
And as I started to get older, there was a stock of, whatever beers and spirits and stuff that my parents had. They had their own little cupboard that was a bar, and
mm.
I was like, I had to do that. And it got to a point where, like, I even had a part-time job at one of the liquor stores, and
Up discount?
in college. I mean, there wasn't a discount, but you got to know where all the new stuff was. and
Mm,
and and so, like, I mean, I didn't lose money working there, but I definitely wanted to try more things, and I
mm,
built my own stock at my house because that's what I thought was true. And anytime it was the weekend or even through the week, especially in college, it was like this was normal. You
Yeah.
stock up on the Monday, and then you kind of get yourself through the week, and rinse and repeat every weekend.
How did that, I mean, describe the effect on your health from there. Did you, was it something that you noticed as you're going, or was it a case, now you look back and you can go, okay, I can see a decline? Was it rapid? Was it slow? Or kind of like the frog in the pot boiling up? And then, as you said, you were 300 pounds, if I heard correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was definitely slow, because when I was 20 and in that range, 20, 25, it was like I knew a lot of the people at the bars, and the club life,
Mm,
and college. Like, it was, and you're younger, you bounce back a lot better. I
yeah.
didn't have kids at the time, so like there's different things with that environment. And then as I was getting older, it was like I was trying to chase down that 20-year-old version of myself that could have that
Mm,
resiliency with drinking, and then have like um have all these drinks and social events, and looking for that buzz that I could hold a lot longer when I was at 20 years old. And it was like, with social things and responsibilities, and we would get to functions late. So it's like, and I didn't always drink, but when I was drinking, at a function, it was like I had to catch up because we got there late. So when I
mm,
was catching up, I was drinking faster. And so I didn't turn the pace off. I would almost bypass whatever version of that buzz I thought I was looking for. And
mm,
then I'd maintain this pace all night, get to a point where just, well, and I held it. I don't know, it's not a good argument, but I held it well.
yes.
I just couldn't function later. At the end of the night, I was, irritable. There was definitely some times my wife and I fought because, she, through pregnancy and breastfeeding, like, we have 3 kids, so there was quite a few years there, where she didn't drink at all,
Mm,
or didn't want to be in a position to not be able to take care of the kids. So even when she wasn't pregnant or breastfeeding, it was like, I'm only going to have one because I don't want to not be able to do it. And it was almost worse for me because it was permission. It was like, okay, well, you're only going to have one, so I can have a couple more. But
mm,
I didn't turn off that catch up mentality, or that pace, that I was looking for. So it just, slow burn over period of time, because I would, you get drinking and you get snacking more and eating more, and my motivation was a lot less. So I wasn't running or working out or doing things. So I got to that point at 320 pounds, and I'm 5'10". So like, it was quite a bit more than I should have been. And a part of feeling like miserable, mentally, physically, was because I knew better. I knew, we know what we have to
mm,
do. It's just because I would come from this place of, construction and firefighting, and a lot of that toxic masculinity I mentioned, like, I couldn't ask for help. I had to fix that myself. It was
mm,
like, you made this mess, you have to fix it yourself. And to journal or to ask for help, or to, it wasn't in my makeup because of the influences I had. My dad's a mechanic, and he was on the volunteer fire department at one point, and it was a very toughen up and fix it environment. So feeling so miserable at that 320-pound range, it was
mm,
like, I don't know what to do anymore, because I can't fix this myself. It was getting more. That was the heaviest I'd been. It was the lousiest I felt. Couldn't go up a flight of stairs without being winded. Couldn't play with my
mm,
kids. At that point, my youngest, she was just, 3 months old
mm.
when I decided at the end of 2020 to make a change. So with my drinking habits, and being aware of what that environment was doing for me, it seemed like the best place to start, by taking that break from drinking, by eliminating that for a while. Because at the time I didn't really know. So by removing that from my life for a while, it was going to give me, maybe it was going to give me some clarity to be able to do something else to help with what I felt like I was doing wrong with my health.
Can we expand a little bit? Would you mind going there? Is talking about this component where you say you knew better, and as a result, you felt bad because you knew you shouldn't be doing this. And I would imagine that related also to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said your wife, you're there and she's saying, okay, I'll only have one because I'm looking after the children. And I know what it's like having drunk as well. It's, you don't wake up feeling the best in the morning. That's why I didn't go back. I mean, when I split up with that partner that I was with, when I stopped drinking, and then when I went out to some social events, I had some drink and I found it made me really tired. So I was like, I don't like this and I don't need this to feel good because I'd been
Mhm.
feeling good anyway. And that's why I kind of went, well, it's making me feel tired. I don't want that. And that's where I'm wondering from that perspective, this whole knowing better and then making yourself, and as a result, you feel bad. And you talked about your wife, she would have, one drink because there's children to look after. And you're in that environment where you see that and you're having a drink and then you're tired and not able to look after children. I could imagine you said some of those arguments are about you not doing some things that could have helped. I'm guessing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, there was definitely some moments that um, I look back on and realize there was probably a bit more towards a problem there because
Mm,
I was living that um, unhealthy drinking lifestyle where, yeah, I'd be hungover. And then I remember being young and a child, and this is something like I said earlier about patterns that I was around growing up. And like my brothers and I, we had to be quiet in the mornings, and
mm,
it was not, it was, respectful, but it was like we knew better because the version of what my parents were going to be like getting up, if we were stomping around and jumping and fighting with each other and making
mm.
noise, like it was almost like walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And in our best interest to, if we heard a noise that they were waking up, it was like, go start the coffee because they put the coffee on, it'll make life easier. We became almost like fortune tellers in a way
Yeah.
to know what our next move should be to make that morning easier. And I was starting to do that with my family because it
Mm,
was like I needed that minute in the morning to wake up, and I was miserable about anybody, you know, being too loud or asking me too many questions or having to have that coffee. And it was like I was recognizing that I was doing this thing that I noticed when I was younger. I was
mm,
repeating something that I couldn't stand growing up. And there was moments like that, or my wife drinking and or not drinking and I am, and the tension that that would create with us later because even before we get to the next function, she'd say, oh well, this can't be like last time where I'm fighting with you to leave, because when it's time to go, the kids are young, we got a babysitter, just when it's time to go, let's go. And there's these moments, and it added up to, plus the 320 pounds. And it was like, I just need to get this out of my life for a while and figure out what I should do.
and how so from that perspective, describe what it was like for you. What were you feeling when you go in that space and you look at it and you go, "Well, okay," you've said you're feeling bad, but the cycle was going. So you're recognizing, "I know better," and then you're recognizing you're not doing something that probably should be doing. Um, and you're in that moment, said your wife saying, "We need to go earlier," and there's a responsibility there. It's that denial. What was that denial like? How did that affect you emotionally?
Well, I think for a while I was very, I denied it, that I was that person. Like I didn't believe that it was as problematic as it was, and that
Mm,
I was becoming that version that I didn't like from my childhood. That and just people around me, you see other people like, wow, that's why can that person let himself get like that? And I think me being in denial really kept me from feeling the way that I should have. And say I know better. And your question earlier, it's like, I was a volunteer firefighter. There's some people with some great levels of fitness there, and
mm,
it's almost like I was negative towards that person or persons because, like, oh, look at them, like they're not going to drink and then they're going to go for a run later, like, oh, why would they do that? That's not fun. And like I was in that realm where I didn't want that stuff, didn't appreciate that stuff, so I was, like, judging that person when that was
Mm.
an example of how I knew better because, that I didn't see that person fighting or going through the things I felt like I was going through, and I wasn't relating it to drinking. It was just, um, because I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't cognizant that this drinking and this environment was making me be miserable, making me be impatient, and create the kinds of patterns and things that I witnessed or was a part of growing up from my parents.
Do you think part of that, you know, denial, the judgment there was um, to push it away from being your responsibility that you were actually doing this?
I think so. I think not being aware of it, I wasn't um, taking responsibility for my role in
Mm.
what was created. Um, just like I've learned since about the powers of changing habits and creating new routines and how everything we want to do to make better versions of ourselves all stems around we have to do that. Those
Mm.
things aren't just going to fall in our laps. Those things aren't going to change ourselves. If we want to learn how to do something or we want to change something about ourselves, it takes time and effort. And I didn't realize in that moment, staying living in that lane of that routine and habit that I had towards drinking and social functions and hosting. I didn't realize that I was the one that had to do this. I was the one that had to stop drinking and then make changes contrary to what people around me were doing. Like when
Mm.
I started journaling, and this journaling was at that place where I was feeling at my worst, and it was like feeling like I'd tried everything. It was like I just need to outlet. I just need to outlet where I'm not going to get any judgment. I'm not going to have someone try and fix it for me. And the journaling was just somewhere that I could get thoughts down and outlet and question what it was I was doing. And I wasn't telling anybody about it. Like, at first, my wife didn't even know about it because that toxic masculine environment was like, you can't be weak, you can't be vulnerable. And if you're journaling or if you have a diary as a grown adult male, like especially coming from construction and firefighting and the people that I was
Mm.
around, it was like you can't. These people can't find out that I'm keeping a journal about how I'm feeling terrible and how I need to admit something to change. And it was the accumulation of all these things that was like I need to do something. So 2020 wrapping up, it was like dry January was coming around and I needed to take that break, and other people around me were going to, and I didn't need anybody else to do it, but I think at the time I felt less pressure because some people around me weren't drinking for that little bit either.
That's where
And while those
go ahead.
I was going to say while those people only did dry January for a couple weeks and I carried on, it was like a test for me. The first small test for me was to make it last longer than the people around me. Like, get through
Mm.
the rest of the month when others around me weren't.
Mm. Is it a case too? Because I love this part where you're talking about. Oh, and I say I love this. I love that you're opening up about this and sharing this. Where you're talking about this experience where you were worried about people judging you, if that's what I heard correctly.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so and what? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say I constantly thinking about what the people around me were going to think if I wasn't going to have that drink or if I was going to be different. Like, there's a lot of pressure when we're at a social function or after work, work in construction, and you go out for a beer with the guys, and men and women both work construction, so whoever wants to go out, you're just going out to the restaurant or to the bar to have that drink, and to not do that anymore. There's a lot of pressure because people are like, oh well, what do you mean, like, it's Friday and you can have one, you can have one, you can have one.
Mm.
How many times have you heard that? And it's like, oh, but then your wife's not here, so then it becomes something, not because of something that I want. It's like, oh, but your wife's not here. And like, this decision came from me. Like, it wasn't pressure from my wife to change, although there was some tension there with certain environments. It was like, I don't need my wife to be here to tell me whether I want to drink or not. When I had
Mm.
decided to take this break, and in those situations where there's that much pressure to carry on, I think it's because that's just what we do. That was just, you go to that place and you have that drink, and when someone decides they don't want to do that anymore, it's like, well, wait a minute. Well, maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I'm going to come here and I want to hang out with people, but I don't really want to drink either.
Mm.
And I found that when I started to be that person, it was like, no, I'm good. Like, I'll have this water or whatever, and I mean, I put it in a beer glass or something to have that mechanism, like I was still playing the game, but I could drink whatever I wanted and then still feel like I was doing it, and other people around me were doing it too. All of a sudden, it was like it was permission for some other people that were thinking about change to decide that they wanted to be different as well.
And that's what I was wondering about from that perspective. Is it a case of, it's one of those things where everyone's thinking it, but no one's doing it. And then as soon as you start doing it, the floodgates open. Was that what your experience was?
I did find some of that, for sure. There was me not drinking at times. It was like someone else was drinking these sparkling waters and something else, and they're like, "No, I'm good." Like, and I'd have some people from work, construction people that I would often have drinks with. All of a sudden, I'm getting messages from people that I'm not working on the same site anymore, and they're like, "Man, you're doing awesome. This is great. Keep it up." Because you don't know who's watching. You don't know who's taking this in. And I've had people from different areas of my life, from family that knew me growing up, and then people I used to drink with that are also not anymore. And then, like, I'm hearing your story, this is great. And another thing, I started talking at some mental health centers and where I live, and I'm getting people, the director, reaching out, telling me that I've influenced people in that group that are now up to this many and that many days not drinking. And I'm getting
Mm.
all these affirmations, and it's definitely inspiring to want to continue, because I know people are watching this example.
And for people that are listening, where they might be in that category, because that's where I wanted to touch on that, because it's at my experience as well, where I've been in environments and there's been people we're just interacting, and it's more about the social interaction as opposed to whether you're drinking. There's been a number of people, including myself, that are not drinking, and we're just doing what's right for us. And I love what you said there about you don't need my wife to tell me what I do and don't want to do. You make that decision for yourself. And it's the same goes for your friends as well. It's, look, I don't need my friends to tell me what I do and can and can't
Hmm.
do. It's my choice. But what I find interesting is when we were talking about it before, and that's why I wanted to ask about that, was when you were drinking and it was the thing that you did, and you were associating with people who were drinking, but you were also in those same groups, as you mentioned. There was in the firefighter groups, there was people that didn't drink at those events, and they were always there. And linking that to the judgment, the wondering about people judging you, do you think those people, if you had said to them, "Hey, look, I'm, what's it like to not drink?" or just have some questions to them, do you think they would have been judgmental?
I think naturally, until we're aware of it and tried to not be judgmental, we kind of are. I think there was a bit back and forth in my environment where
Mm,
we were just as judgmental as some of those people, because oh, you're not going to drink, and they're over there, oh, those guys are just drinking. Like,
mm,
there's a bit of it from both directions. But I think what we found, because these weren't just going for a drink afterwards and it getting out of hand. It was like these were barbecues or summer
mm,
parties or Christmas parties. These were functions where, not that it's okay to get out of hand, but it seemed like there was more fun on one side of the room than the other. And on the other side of the room, there was, people twiddling the bottle of water, like, I can't wait to get out of here. And a part of, like, the rules that I created for myself that I write about in this book is, one of the things that stood out to me was that person standing over there drinking from a bottle of water, and like flipping their keys, like saying they're ready to leave. I didn't want to give that I didn't want to give that image. I didn't want to show that. I kind of wanted to be more present in any environment I was in, to not be, twiddle the bottle of water around. So that was where I came up with, having this coffee mug or Yeti mug that I could use as almost a security blanket for a while,
Mm,
that I could put whatever I wanted in there, and I could, sip from it, and I could hold it empty if I wanted to. But it was like I was had the same stance as the other people, and I was sipping the same way the other people was, and it was like I wasn't twiddling the bottle of water around. I was still engaged, and I was still there.
mm,
Um, so the judgment, I definitely think there was judgment both ways, but that's almost where you've got strength in numbers, where, now I'm not looking at that person with a bottle of water as, the opposition. I'm looking for that person, like the person I want to talk to, the person I want to engage with, because it can be super awkward in those environments, and there's a lot of pressure. And while I still want to get out and have a good time, it's like it does get to a point where it's like, okay, I've had enough of this. I can't do this anymore. I'm not looking to be this obnoxious and certain things. I kind of grew out of that part of my life where I had to be the last one up. And coming from construction and firefighting, I don't trust my friends at all, so I didn't want to be the first one to go to sleep. But now I'm like, I don't, I'm just, you guys do your thing, I'm out.
yeah. How do you think it affected? I mean, because what you're talking about there is you've become your own person. You're not influenced by other people. You're making your decisions to design your life that's right for you. How do you think that's affected your relationship with your children and as a role model for your children?
I can't, but I couldn't comprehend the living the same, like going down the same path I was when I look back. By eliminating drinking and that habit from my life and being more present, like my kids are now 2.5, 7, and almost 10.
Mm,
And there's a lot of energy there, a lot of energy that I wasn't giving them, to play with them outside, and to be engaged and do things with them. And by not being super hungover and not doing the same things habitually, and my routine with the weekends, and I'm spending more time with them. I'm playing with them outside. I'm making sure we have those moments, and because I'm not afraid of what my buddies or whoever's going to say, because they heard I read um Brene Brown or Mel Robbins books, or because I'm listening to podcasts and self-help, and giving back to that space as much as I can. I don't, well, I don't care that the negativity might come back. So I'm translating that back, and my kids they're doing so much better. Like, we're now, because I read them The Energy Bus by John Gordon, we are now doing favorite things at dinner. We're sitting at the supper table, and we're going around the table, and each of us takes a turn to pick out our favorite thing of the day. And like my middle child, who has had some anxiety concerns, and he has a hard time, and like he's so engaged now, he will, in like will there be 20 people around at a function, and he will make sure we do favorite things at dinner, and every single person around us gets involved, and it's really cool to see.
I love that.
And that
Go
that
ahead.
wouldn't have happened before. That wouldn't have been in our life before.
So this it almost sounds like your focus shifted from being about you to being about the wider people in your life, especially those close to you. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think it was because I couldn't have a drink, right? I don't, what people do with drinking, like, we're all different, right? So
Mm,
it's not like I removed that from my life and it fixed everything else. But that became like a catalyst for me to
mm,
say, like, if I can not drink this anymore, and then I can still go out to a function and drink whatever I want, and be social and have fun, and then then, well, what else could I do? Well, I'm going to start reading these books and these podcasts, and I'm going to
Mm,
start doing these things that I thought weren't for me before because they weren't macho, they weren't manly, or they weren't, who I was supposed to be because of some definition created however long ago. It gave me that room to develop the person that I wanted to be, and I became less negative. I wasn't so cynical, and I started cheering for other people when in the past I would just look at someone else's happiness and success and wonder why I didn't have it.
mm. And that's where coming back to did when you're saying when you're wondering about other people's success, or and well, looking at other people's success and wondering why you didn't have it, was that linked back to what you mentioned earlier about you knowing better but not taking that action?
Yeah, I think that was me waiting for the situation to fix itself. That
Mm,
was, I knew that you had to work for something, and in order to have something, you need to work for it. And then it's like we don't recognize when we see someone that becomes successful or that has something good happen, that there's all this work that's taken place behind them. We just see the shining light and be like,
mm,
oh, well, that's too easy. But it's like learning that I had to fix the situation, and then by allowing things into my life that I thought were not the macho manly thing that I was supposed to do, by fixing it myself and not asking for help and don't show weakness. It was like by branching out and allowing these things, these tools and different techniques and things, it was like um I wasn't going to find it. It wasn't going to fix itself until
mm.
I was ready to do something about it.
And from that perspective, where you're talking about, you had to do the work. We talk about that. People talk about that a lot. You have to do the work, and it's hard. And I'm wondering from your perspective, if you look at now, your relationship, let's you take that sitting around the dinner having the conversations with your children, compared to, go back when you were drinking and hungover. Is it harder to do what you're doing now around the table, or was it harder back then to have a connection with your children?
I think it was harder because it was harder then because I didn't know these things, but
Mm,
what I was doing was a common thing, and if I was thinking about doing better, like, I was thinking about the end result, and I
mm,
was thinking about how much work that was gonna be.
mm,
If I've been sober since, January 4th, 2021. I haven't gone back at all, and I want it that way, I appreciate it that way, but, if I was to think of 2.5 years or so sober when I started, it probably would have been a deterrent for me. Like,
mm,
I'm down 100 pounds. I've lost 100 pounds since I started this journey, and if I thought about losing 100 pounds, there's no way I would have stuck with it. So
mm,
I think the hardest part and where I knew better was I wasn't prepared for the big picture, and I didn't have the tools. I didn't know enough about the power of habit and Atomic Habits, these books that I've read now,
mm,
James Clear and that system. Like, if we don't break things down in small pieces,
mm,
dry January. If I didn't do dry January at 30 days and then learn more about habits and add dry February and go to 100 days,
mm,
and the same thing with losing weight and the different things I've worked on with my family and stuff. If I didn't break it down into smaller pieces,
mm,
there's no way I would have been able to compound on it and get to this bigger picture.
mm.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that it's that habit and forming of starting small, and sometimes if we're wanting to run a marathon, like, we have to start just putting our shoes on. Like,
Mm,
let's not worry about the marathon. Let's just figure out how to put our shoes on.
yeah. And that's where from that marathon example, because and I understand where that's coming from, but what really wanted to understand was, and I understand that the change we've got to go through those changes and break those into parts, so we actually do that. But if you were to take, without taking the change process into place, imagine now sitting around the table interacting with your children. How much different is that as far as effort required to interact with your children now, going back to, before you made the change, how much effort was required to have a happy relationship with your children?
There was difficult moments because they're kids, like they don't know these things yet, but
Mm,
like for some reason I thought, especially because like my boys, they're 7 and 9, like they're close enough in age, but it's almost like the 9-year-old, because they're so close in age, I look at the 7-year-old like he should be at the 9-year-old level. So
mm,
when he has some development things that he's just not there yet. Now I completely get it, and I have all the patience in the world to be like, "Oh,
mm,
buddy, this is what I mean."
yeah,
Before, it was like I just automatically got upset, and I got like, all yelling, and I'm like, you need to get over here now, and aggressive, and it's like there is a lot more now where I have so much more patience in those conversations at the dinner table, and my patience with the kids. Like I've noticed a huge difference because I'm not treating them the same way as I did when I was, clouded or in my own version of hangover state or just a toxic mindset.
yeah. And how hard is it now when you look at it and go, well, if you were to be patient, how hard is it now compared to before?
Now it's something that I've got accustomed to, I've worked on, and it's not as hard now to be more patient.
Mm,
It's every time there's something, a moment like that, like I've trained myself to like take that breath and be like, okay, there's 7, or she's 2.5, and 2.5-year olds are gonna do these things. You just need to relax. And
yeah.
and by me relaxing and not being so, hot tempered, it's like I find it a lot easier now, but I didn't
Mm,
know that before. I didn't realize that I had gotten to that point, and I wasn't aware that, I was the problem, that
yeah.
I needed to treat the situations differently and realize they're kids. They just don't know yet.
And that's the point I wanted to, and specifically for the listeners, get to, because I mean, we hear and well, it's known that it takes a lot less muscles to smile than it does to frown, using that as an analogy. And a lot of times we don't realize that what we're doing takes a lot of effort. And if we did behavior slightly differently, not only would we get a better result, but it actually takes less effort and is, is better for us. And that sounds like that process from your, I mean, yes, we've got to go through the process of getting there, and there's a lot of talk about that. But I think from what I've seen, a lot of people don't realize that, they're making their life hard. And if they do things differently, it's not that they have to work harder. There's a transition period, but once you get to there, you're not actually working harder. You're actually working, you're doing less work and you're getting a
Yeah,
better result. Is
yeah,
that fair to say?
yeah. Oh yeah, because along with that, like the problems that we create for ourselves, we don't
Mm,
create those problems anymore.
mm,
The things I was adding to the situation by being irritable, by being impatient, I've taken those things away. So the things that my kids and people around me at work, it's like the things that are brought to my attention and need an action from me, I've removed the barriers that I had on myself, and I'm handling them a lot better. So it's absolutely much easier.
mm. I love that, because, and that's where I really, and it comes back to that whole, we hear it all the time of working smarter, not harder. But how often do we actually do that? We go and repeat the same things again and again.
Well, it's easy because it's what we know, right? That's that
Mm,
the habits and routines. It's like we know how to carry ourselves, or we think we know how to carry ourselves in these every moment, and our brains we've programmed ourselves to find the easiest, path of least resistance. But it's like unless we are open to learning more and trying different things in moments we think we're experts in, we'll never really learn the right way of doing it, or the better way of doing it. We
mm,
in the environment like what I was raised in, and it was healthy, but it was like that's all I knew. So growing up, it's like that was the perfect example. Everything else is wrong. But it wasn't until like I became more open-minded, like, you know what, maybe my parents didn't know everything.
Mm,
Maybe the people in my life didn't know everything. And you know what? That really is a much better way. Like, why wasn't I reading about this stuff before? Or why did I think there was a problem with, listening to this topic on a podcast and not being drunk listening to rock music somewhere? Like it was like knowing that I could get away from it and I could learn these different things was like permission for me to come out of that old mindset, old identity that I carried around and thought was like I would have argued before all this. I would like this is who I am. Like that was my thing. This is
mm,
who I am. That was the excuse I always used because then I didn't have to do anything. It was
mm,
like this is who I am, so I don't have to stop drinking. This is who I am, so I don't have to work out. It's such an easy and I think common excuse for us to use because then we're we don't have to be responsible for it. We don't have to change. That's just who I am. And that was the worst thing I could ever have said to myself. Because
mm,
of getting away from that, it was like, I don't have to be that anymore. I can control it by finding something else to do or drinking water out of a cup or whatever it is. Like all of these things, it could be drinking for me and something else for the next person. It's just getting away from who I thought I had to keep being to be someone that I appreciated more and that my family appreciated more.
mm. This statement that you're saying of "This is who I am," and that's I wanted to explore that a little bit more as to how do we get to a stage where we're as I mean, as a children, generally children are fairly open to learn and they're kind of like sponges. It's been that term's been used a lot where they'll take in information. And then
Mhm.
something happens where we switch. And as you say, this is who I am. We stop listening. And when I say listening, I'm not saying just with our ears, but we just stop observing what's going on around us. Because as you said, you were around people that weren't drinking. And I'm sure they had great lives, maybe not all of them, but I'm sure some of them had great lives, and that was there right in front of you, and yet you didn't want to notice it. What do you think is that reason why we don't want to notice it?
I just don't think we're looking for it. Right?
Mm,
Like I've listened to lots of content where they talk about the brain's RES and
yeah,
the
reticular
reticular activating
activating
system,
yep,
and it's what we want to be aware of will
mm,
stand out to us, like our own name. We hear our own name from from everywhere, even if it's not right. But
yep,
if we're not aware of it, if I'm looking for, going out for drinks with my friends and, living this unhealthy lifestyle and not listening to podcasts, well, those things aren't going to stand out to me because I'm not looking for it. So the
mm,
person not drinking at a function, while I'm aware they're there, it I'm not looking for that because that's not what I want to do at this party or in that environment. So I think that all plays because the things we want to be aware of will stand out more to us and be more acceptable.
mm. So we're kind of reinforcing that and just is it do you think it's an insecurity thing that we if we accept because you say this is who I am. And that's an identity we've created for ourselves. But then if something else comes in you, then do you think we're worried that we lose who we are?
I think so, and I think there might be a bit of a pride thing there too because
Mm,
of that not showing weakness and not being vulnerable. Especially with social media the way it is now, it's like we have to live this perfect life and we have to post all the good stuff and never the bad stuff. And just like
yeah.
me having to run across the room and unplug the Google Mini, it was like, we don't let these things give the picture that we're struggling or that we have these moments that aren't perfect. And I think if we imply that we have to change something about ourselves or that we want to change something about ourselves, we're admitting to that weakness and we're showing that vulnerability. And because we're always worried about what people around us are thinking about us, that's what we're going to go to. We're going to be like, oh, well,
Mm,
I said I wanted to lose weight and now I'm having dessert. So this person's judging me, or, I'm drinking another beer and that one was pretty quick, but, they're judging me because I'm having another beer. And the funny thing is, if we're all doing that, if we're all thinking about what everyone else is thinking,
Yeah.
we're not thinking about ourselves. Nobody's thinking about ourselves. So, it's almost like being aware of that and realizing that, they're worried about themselves and what I
Mm,
think of them, but I'm not thinking about them. I'm going to have this thing and I'm going to listen to this music with these friends and have a good time and not worry about it. It's like something we just have to realize and then almost program like, people aren't worried about what's in the cup I'm drinking from.
mm.
And that was something I got around because even though I had water in that cup for so long at these things, it was like, oh, they know it's water. They're gonna get me because they know it's water, and wow, they're looking at me, and I just gotta pretend like, do I have to start acting silly now because I've had two waters in this cup? Like, it was like people didn't care what was in that cup as much as I thought they did.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering from that perspective. How much is important when you look at your journey, where you just own it and go, "Well, this is me. This is what I do." And even if you mess things up, I did that. Because we all have. I think we've all had that experience. You're walking down the street and you trip on something and you get all embarrassed because you tripped over.
Yeah,
And I remember I decided I did that once, and for whatever reason in that moment, I went, "I'm gonna own this." And I jumped up and I went, "Yeah!" And everyone clapped, and it was like, it became this whole fun thing. And that was kind of a pivotal moment for me. I mean, because I grew up, my mum, you know, she used to wear these beanies before they were cool, and they weren't cool, and at that time, and it was very embarrassing. To me, it was very embarrassing. And I'd say to my, "Ma, what are you wearing?" And she'd go, "Doesn't matter what other people think. Doesn't matter what other people think." And I'm kind of grateful, very grateful for that now, because at a young age that's had an impact, and maybe that was why I could, trip and jump up and go, "Hey, this is cool." But is it a case where we need to get to that position where we just own it and go, "Well, I'm a human being. I'm a person, and that means I'm going to go through process, especially if I'm doing something new. I'm going to have what I call beginner's suck. I'm going to suck at it the first time I try something, and that's okay." Do we need to own that?
I think we do, and I do still think it's going to be more difficult depending on what our circle looks like because
Mm,
like coming from construction and volunteer firefighting and that environment, there's a level of acceptance there and there's a
mm,
level of like pressure to be in with the group and in the clique and
mm.
to to be that person that's not going to do it anymore or that's going to jump up and celebrate almost falling and
Yeah.
having fun with it. It's like, what's the judgment from that group going to be, or the people that I'm trying to be a part of. It's getting away from feeling like you have to be a certain way to be involved with a group and to
Mm,
to be that person that celebrates a trip and has fun with it. There's a great transition there, and I think we've got to work towards being okay with doing that and having fun with it instead of this picture and image that certain groups around us feel like or we feel that they need us to maintain.
mm,
For me to continue having drinks at these functions, it was like, I could easily have gone back. I could have easily like, oh yeah, cool, I made it a couple weeks and that
mm,
was fun. That was fun. Dry January, see you next year. It was like continuing it became the challenge for me to to stay away from where I used to be, like where I felt I had to keep going to be a part of a group. It was like, I could be different now and get through the 30 days and 60 days and not exist in that lane that I thought was the only place that I had to stay. That the person, like I said, that I thought this is who I am.
mm. 'Cause that's interesting from that perspective, because if I heard correctly earlier, you were talking about when you did make that change and you stopped drinking and then you started not so much announcing it, but you just, "Okay, this is who I am." People were accepting of that. Is that what I heard correct?
They they were like there was some family groups that were more accepting sooner.
Yeah.
The masculine environments that I was in, it was a challenge at times. Like
Mm,
I know there's some like we everybody that deals with substances and addictions is different,
mm,
and I don't mean any disrespect. But like if there was an escalated issue, if there was more problem in my drinking than I felt I had. If something, changed that for me, if I had no choice,
mm,
it I don't want to say it would have been easier because I don't mean easy, but to describe it to someone else would have almost been easier if there was a greater problem. The fact that I
mm,
decided to change it on my own because I was unhappy with where I was headed with it, people didn't know how to deal with that. It was like
mm,
confusing because there wasn't, I didn't, there wasn't police. There wasn't a DUI or, driving under the influence. There wasn't these things that happen sometimes, and people make these lifestyle changes because they have to. I didn't get to that point, so it was like I had to convince people that it was something I really wanted.
mm.
Whereas, I don't want to say it would have been easier because I don't mean it, but I think it would have been. I would have had an easier time describing that I
Yeah, the
was
rationale.
changing if
Yeah.
there was something behind me that they were like, "Oh, okay, well that happened, so he has to." It's there was challenges, and people didn't get it because they were in their lane, right? They were
Mm,
staying in the habits and routines that they had. So, for me to be the guy jumping up and having fun with that moment, like you described, that had people looking at me like, "What do you mean you don't want to drink? Like
mm.
it's February now. Like you did January. Good for you. Let's go." Like, well, no, like this is who
Mm,
I want to be now. And there was a friend of mine, someone that I'm still friends with, but like it was his wedding during that year that I wrote about in this book, and all year, every function we had, I was in his wedding, and he was in my wedding years before, and at my wedding we drank a lot together.
mm,
So he expected this version of me at his wedding, like what we had together at mine. And
mm,
every time we get fitted for a suit, and you better drink at my wedding. And we get the bachelor party, and I went to the bachelor party and didn't drink. Very much very challenging, but I
mm,
had the tools at that point to help me get through it. And and then, every day at the bachelor party, you better drink at my wedding. And there was all these moments where I was so full of anxiety because I didn't want it. Someone around me that
mm,
I was friends with wanted it from me. Do I go back? Do I make it to the wedding and then be okay with it? And deciding to stick with it and continue on.
mm,
There's definitely those pressures, and it was a lot harder in those different moments. But when I committed to it myself and I wanted it bad enough, it was a lot easier for me, like we said earlier, once I started to have the tools and once I wasn't in my own way, it became a lot easier to not be a certain way and not have
mm,
drinks at the wedding and to tell them and just say, "Listen, this is what I want to do right now. And this is who I am now. I'm still going to have fun and I'm not going to miss your day and it won't ruin anything. We're just not going to do what we used to do here."
mm,
And up until the wedding day, it was a challenge, but, he became great in the end. Like, we had other functions, and everyone around the table at the restaurant got all their, fancy alcoholic drinks, and it took me forever to get, the soda or diet pop or whatever I was waiting for, but it was him that pointed it out. He's like, "Hey, can we get," like, he's still waiting, and then it was just an affirmation for me to be like,
yeah,
he gets it now. He may not
yeah,
come out and say, "You know what, like, I appreciate what you're doing." It was like, the small moment that was like, "Okay, he's cool with what I've done here." And I
mm,
put a lot more pressure on myself than I probably needed to, but that's a hard thing to listen to when you've decided to do something and change, and you've got this, "You better be this way because I said," you know?
mm. That's an interesting point, and I understand where that pressure comes from as well, because in similar sort of circumstance, one of my best friends, I was in wedding years ago. I was in the wedding party, and I had to tell him, "I'm not coming to your bachelor party." because they were planning to go to strip clubs. And I was like, I don't want to go there. I'm not going. And he didn't take that very well. I still ended up being in the in the bridal party, but yeah, he initially he told me afterwards. He goes, he went there and he was out in the garden ripping things out of the garden, going, "Why won't he come? Why won't he come?" And I was like, "Well, it just wasn't right for me." And but that again, it didn't. It was a difficult thing for him. For me, it was kind of it wasn't so difficult. I was prepared to go. Well, if this is the case and it ends our friendship, but it ends our friendship, but I still value as a person, but I'm just not doing this part. And I can understand where you're coming from that. But then that transition as well, they go, okay, that's all okay. And it was a different
Yeah,
experience.
and then we're not. It's not always going to go that way, right? Like this very well could have gone the other way, where it was like, okay, well, you didn't drink at my wedding, and we grow apart because there's definitely been people that, I'm not going to the same functions anymore, and I'm not doing the same things, and while we run into each other, we're still friends, but it's like we just don't have that common thing anymore,
Yeah.
right? What we used to do together was only really related around having drinks and listening to music or whatever, and it's
Mm,
because that's not who I am anymore. Like, sometimes we grow apart from people, and
mm,
we just it is what it is, right? We move on and wish people the best, and like I said, if I run into some people and there's some stories we can talk about and catch up, it's great. If there's not, well, then I can't bring myself down because that relationship isn't there anymore. It isn't
mm,
the way that it used to be, and that's something we teach ourselves. Right in the beginning, I was worried about losing the friends, and I was worried about not having the life that I thought was who I am. um,
mm,
but I just created some better moments and met some new people, and the whole thing about the best of who you're around, or you're a product of who the people you're around. And it's like, I was going out to these functions and having drinks, and that's what we did, and that was a great time. But now that I'm not doing those things, like, I'm meeting people and doing things differently now.
mm.
I just ran my first ever 5K 5 kilometer race. It
Awesome.
was for me, and something I never done. I was never going to do it because there's going to be people there, and they were going to see me, and it was going to look out of
Mm,
place. But that was why I decided to do it, was because I started to do things that weren't who I used to be, because I found the benefit in coming outside of that box, right? Being
mm,
being different, running a 5K, and I'll do some more. I think it was a good moment, and something that I would have never experienced if I was still living in that old mindset that I was in.
mm. Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I have a friend in Texas. He used to be a heavy drug user, and he stopped, and he found that the giver's high, because he helps a lot of people, was actually better and higher than any of the drugs he took. And not only that, there was no downer as well. He would, he'd
Mhm.
feel really good about helping people, and that feeling goes on, and there's no downer from that. Talk from that perspective. Talk about the book. How did you get to writing the book? What was the inspiration for doing that? And talk us through that process.
So it was never something that I thought was going to happen. It was the journal that I had created for myself at the end of 2020, just beating myself up, this outlet, this place for me to write these thoughts down. But as I started into dry January, and I started getting to a point where I was, embracing more that I thought wasn't for me, listening to podcasts and listening to audiobooks, and keeping this journal going, like writing my rules that I create for myself just to keep myself focused. And I I took this journal and I maintained it through this full year, from
Mm,
going 30 days, 60 days, 100 days, and the decision to, how cool would it be if I could not drink for an entire year?
mm,
That blew my mind to even consider it, because that had never occurred to me, that in my habits and routines that I was in, I was going to do that.
mm,
So I maintained this journal all throughout, and kept, it got away a bit from beating myself up, and more encouragement, and making sure I didn't forget certain moments and certain pressures and certain things I did that worked and didn't work.
mm,
And it was about 9 or 10 months, about October. The wedding had already happened, and a friend from work, he was like, "Oh, like how are things?" And it was genuine. He said, "How are things?" And I was like, "Oh man, I could write a book." And it was a saying like, I have so much that has happened and so many things, but then like that statement, it was like, I kind of have written a book, and I was like thinking to myself, in the beginning of this journey, when I was, starting to get into some content, I wasn't ready for, Tony Robbins and all these influential people,
Mm,
because those were the people that knew all this stuff. I wanted somebody that was getting started. I wanted somebody that I felt like I could relate to.
mm,
And when I thought like I could write a book, I was like, well, this is very relatable. This is something that
mm,
I could have used when I was looking for it to get started. And it was kind of that moment as I rounded out the year that is the context of this part of this journey. It was like, this is something that would help my old self. This is something that
mm,
I could have used. And then I started working on, and I found someone to, like, I self-published, so I found someone to help me with editing and
mm,
make sure that it was something that made sense once I transitioned it from where I was beating myself up and where I was putting all these things that only I knew about, to
mm,
something that a reader would be able to be a part of. um, did I, make the decision to really get behind it and put it out there, and accept the vulnerability and say the weakness that I'm showing with this part of my life for someone else that could benefit from it.
mm. Love that. That's awesome. Sean, if you were to put in a nutshell, what being manly is, how would you sum that up?
I think that being manly is, there's strength. I think strength is being manly, but strength doesn't always have to be that you can't be show weakness, that you can't, that
Mm,
you have to be perfect. I
mm,
think the context of being manly isn't that we have to maintain this strong, perfect male presence. That we can be warm, we can be vulnerable, and we can be supportive, and still be every bit manly as we feel we need to be.
I love that. Sean, thank you very much for taking time and sharing your knowledge on the What is Manly podcast as part of Share.care. It's been wonderful having you. I love that you've opened up and shared your experience so that people they can realize, hey, we can go through this journey. It's not just we're stuck with where we're at. We can actually move to different places. So really appreciate you opening up and sharing your experience here on the Share.care podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate being here, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes for others and for you.